From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there, and welcome to Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis. You know, I have, and maybe you do too, a kind of a fuzzy, nostalgic relationship with Sears, especially the one at Six Corners, which my parents and I visited a lot. You know, that Formica table, the dinette set, the couch, it all came from there. Oh, and that tool department down in the basement. Oh, the sets of wrenches and the power drills and the blue work pants we all wore in the high school machine shop and the print shop. Okay, all right, that's it's the last operating Sears store in Chicago right now. And our guest today says, you know, don't get too attached to it because Sears just can't hang on that much longer. And Portage Park is going to have to adjust to this. But anyway, there's a lot going on here because there's thousands of other stores in the United States that closed just in 2017 as the whole nature of commerce changes almost by the hour. In a way, it helps to make the argument that Chicago should be the next Amazon HQ because think about it. What Amazon is doing to the economy today is really kind of an uncanny parallel to what Sears did down at Holman and Arthington in 1906. Our economy is transforming itself in almost every way you can think of. If you try to imagine maybe you're running an airline today or a cable company or an established fast food company, it's all part of why it's a pretty cool job to be a business columnist in today's environment. You've got so much to write about. And we just happen to have one in the house today. Bob Reed has been the Tribune's business columnist for about 18 months now, and he's had a remarkable career in radio and print and also in government, and he's somebody we've wanted to have on the show for just a really long time. So welcome, Bob
Thank you
Reed.
very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So glad to have you here. And I didn't even mention a stint at the Better Government Association,
Yeah,
too.
6 years.
You've kind of managed to do a little bit of everything. And
I like to
that's very
think of
cool.
it as well-traveled.
Yeah, and it is, and you know, not to the same extent as you, but I also have kind of been in media and government and everything else, and it's kind of interesting to get to a certain age and look back on it and see that you got a lot of perspective on a lot of different things. So I know it's kind of corny, but I just thought it would be interesting to start with Sears because Sears has everything, and the thing it has for us today is it has all these lessons to learn, you know. They're pretty much done for, right?
The Sears of Bold that you and I remember, and you mentioned the Six Corners store, I too, having been raised around that neighborhood and having gone to high school just down the street at Shores High School.
Oh, did you? Oh, okay. Prosser.
Knew about that was a shopping mecca. And
Yes,
I think
it was.
outside of downtown, it was one of the most popular. Yeah. And the Sears store in its heyday did have everything. Mm-hmm. It sort of backed up the advertising slogan that it used. And I mean, to this day, I can still remember the windows, the big picture windows that would highlight every holiday. Whether it was Christmas or Valentine's Day, there was something up there. Yeah. And, you know, it's really more nostalgia now.
It is.
I went through that store. It's clean but sparse, and it's sort of a hodgepodge of different things thrown together. And it reflects the Sears retail strategy, which is sort of kind of all over the map and casting aside this and that and so on.
Let's just sell whatever we can.
Let's do what we can to keep the doors open. Yeah. And that particular parcel of land, I found out after I did a column on it, is actually already being marketed.
It is.
It is. And I don't know if they've had anybody interested in looking at it, but
you mean the land or the building?
The whole thing. The whole footprint over there is being marketed, and we'll see what happens with that. Yeah. And so when you mentioned Portage Park, like a lot of neighborhoods in Chicago that had these thriving business districts, they're having to remake themselves. Yeah. You know, it's a challenge because the big stores are going away, and even like the second-tier stores are so worried that they're not opening up new outlets. Yeah. And it's a direct relationship to Amazon and what it's doing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You know, we joke. I mean, it's this kind of corny joke now when we say, you know, Sears, the store that has everything. If you could put everything that Amazon has in a store, it would be about half the size of a city, because now you can literally say you can get anything online, and there's one behemoth company that does it better than anybody else. So the whole notion of having to go somewhere, trundle down there, and then walk out with your little bag with it is it just seems like, it feels like that was 100 years ago. You know?
Yeah, it does. And there's a school of thought, though, that at least 40% will still be people wanting to go and touch the material
Sure,
and see
of
what
course.
they have. But the whole relationship is changing. So maybe you'll go to a store and pick up something that you ordered online.
Yeah.
We're going to see that in retail, apparel and appliances, and we're also going to see it in groceries. That's a real big area of change. And Amazon is driving all of this. You say all the things that Amazon has, that's why they have the cloud, I guess. But it's also why in Illinois they're opening up all these distribution centers and fulfillment centers with the help of some state government grants and such.
Actually, the state is opening them in many cases.
The state should be a partner. But they're doing that because of Illinois and Chicago area's centralized location, which is very important to Amazon.
Right. But it's, as you say, it's more than just Amazon, because I mean, I've learned a lot from reading back columns of yours, especially this thing about the kind of tier 2 stores in malls. We think that I had kind of imagined that the sort of the super malls like Woodfield and maybe Oak Brook and perhaps I don't know, a few others would manage to make it through this, because they would kind of remake themselves a little bit, but also there would always be this market for these things. But as you point out, a lot of the what do you call them, inline stores, right? The stores that populate all the corridors in the malls, they're just dropping like flies.
And in some respects, they're more harder hit than the big anchor stores, which are also being hit very hard. And you're right, those second-tier stores, maybe they have one specific product or a couple of well-known products. They just can't compete. And the malls, as we've known them, are rapidly changing. The other, the newest wrinkle is that the movie theaters that are in the malls now are under tremendous pressure as well. Online streaming and all sorts of things are keeping people in the home, out of the malls. You just don't have the traffic like you used to. So you're going to see a lot of these malls repurposed. They're going to become maybe
server farms.
Medical facilities, retirement homes. They'll be knocked down and turned into something new. A lot of that, and that's going to greatly disrupt the tax base of a lot of municipalities.
We had someone on last week from the Illinois Solar Energy Association, and we were again kind of sardonically laughing about the fact that, well, there's something you can do with all those Kmarts. Just use them as stands for solar arrays, and just put solar arrays in the parking lots and stuff that we're not going to need anymore. It's an incredible time to be alive, to see these kinds of disruptions come once in a generation, or maybe every couple of generations. This is big
stuff, and it is across the board. It's going to happen in medicine, it's happening in education, you name it, whatever it is, whether it's a for-profit industry, a non-for-profit industry, the changes that are rippling through are going to have to be dealt with. And what no one can really say right now, is it for the greater good? And, and what's the greater good? Will people be employed? Will they be able to live where they want to live? Will they be able to have the kind of communities and the cohesiveness of communities that we've had when you've got all these disparate parts flying around?
I mean, what do you do when the only job left is being a truck driver delivering this stuff? Or maybe a drone operator who drops it on your porch or something. I mean, I know it sounds ridiculous and it's alarmist, and forgive us, we don't mean to be scaring you or anything, but it really does feel like there's a time coming down the road when there's just no employment. There's just nothing really to do.
Well, the employment that we know, you mentioned the truck drivers. Well, driverless trucks are on the way.
I forgot that part.
Driverless cars. You're going to need people who program them, who can fix them,
Okay,
understand
there's 10
them.
people.
And
Yeah.
right. But will you need the abundance of labor that we have seen in the past?
Yeah.
Probably not. And it's why it's so important to change with the times and be able to reinvent yourself.
Yeah.
We have seen in our profession alone, journalism, whether it's newspapers or broadcast or whatever it may be, go through seismic changes.
Yeah.
We no longer have the employment base
Right.
there used to be, and it's directly because of technology and changing consumer tastes.
And well, I mean, oh boy, there are so many cul-de-sacs we could go down here when you open the question about journalism. We recently saw what happens with something like DNA Info, where you actually have something that really was a great employer of really young, energetic, talented people, and then one day it just all disappears, poof, because the guy who owns it decides he doesn't want to do it anymore. But that is something that's also driven by distribution and online, that a company that couldn't have existed 20 years ago just came out of nowhere and became a force in journalism in a very short period of time, and then went away in a very short period of time.
Well, and that's the upside of technology, is that the barriers to entry are lower than they have ever been. And so, yes, you're able to put that type of thing together and get going right away, gain the name recognition, and even in this case, you were able to penetrate the markets that they did. And I agree with you. It's a huge loss from a community journalism point of view, because they did tremendous work. But I also can say that, hyper-local news is a bad business model. It has failed repeatedly,
so, right.
and it will continue to fail because you don't have the economic base. If you're counting on the local restaurant and local business, which I so thinly capitalize to support, it's not going to happen. And on the other end, you don't have the scale that you would need to get major advertisers. So if it's an advertising model, you have problems. And this is a little off topic, but which is one of the reasons.
There is no topic. You can't be off topic.
Which is one of the reasons why you're seeing more of these nonprofit models pop up in journalism.
Yeah.
Having lived that life for a number of years, I also know that there are potholes there because you're going to people for funding.
Right.
That can be a very difficult and fickle
Well, I
arena.
assume you're talking about your time with the Better Government Association, right?
Yes.
Which is, again, so many of us, and I don't mind at all detouring into the talk about journalism because it's something we both know a little something about. But I mean, for the longest time, I spent many years in non-commercial radio and public radio, and it was a hell of a struggle to get on the air and beg people to please send us $40, would you please? But it did work, and in fact, a rather huge industry got built on top of that, and it's a very successful thing today, and. What happened, I think, is a lot of people looked at that and said, oh, look, that's the way to do it. All you do is just ask the audience for money and they'll give you money. Not recognizing that it was about a 30-year struggle to get it to that point, and it wasn't necessarily a model that you could just pick up and transplant into something else. And there's been a lot of this conversation about whether there can be non-commercial journalism entities, and some of them are working and some of them are succeeding, but my sense of it is that they're small and that they will never replace the New York Times or the Chicago Tribune or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you will have pockets of success, but will it be sustainable as the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon, owns the Post, and the New York Times, which seems to have made the pivot into the digital world more successfully, but it's a national brand.
Right.
I don't really know if you're going to have a lot of these nonprofits continuing for a very long time because, as I said, the funding is difficult, and there's a lot of people asking for money for a lot of different causes.
That's for sure.
And
if you have an email account,
exactly,
you know
particularly at the end of the year.
Right.
And so, yeah, you're going to compete no matter what business model you have.
Yeah, but the thing that led us down this kind of dark road is this thought that there are, I don't know, 8 billion people on the planet, and it seems like there are about 2 million jobs. And I just do not understand how we're going to get through this. I mean, I really don't. I get rather depressed when I start thinking about if I had the opportunity to push a button and be 22 years old again, I would not push that button. And yet, at a different level, I'm just thrilled at all. I'm so happy to be alive at a time when the Library of Congress is available to us on this, and all these other wonderful things. But I just don't understand how we're going to pay for it.
That is going to be one of the huge challenges in the years to come.
Yeah.
And right now, I think we're putting our young people at a real disadvantage. The cost of school is tremendously high. Student loans are dragging them down in terms of being able to prepare for the future. What you find, though, and I don't know if this will always be true, is that a lot of young people prefer the independence of not being a full-time employee.
Yeah.
They like to be independent contractors. They their time, they prefer to be as much of their own as they can. They sort of weave the job into their lives.
Yeah.
I think that's a departure from other generations where you worked and then you went home and there were lines of division. And I don't think that's such a bad thing, particularly when you're younger and trying to get up and running, but inevitably they're going to have families, own homes, face the responsibilities that come with that. You're going to need more structure in your life.
Well, you know,
and more jobs.
Interestingly, much of my life was that way too. I've been an independent contractor most of my life, and I have been able to sort of, you know, put a life together doing that. But I just fear that even that isn't as stable as it was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, because you could be an independent contractor, but you could be pretty stable as an independent contractor. Now it's almost by the hour. I mean, you're a Lyft driver or something. You make $28 today. That's what you make.
Yeah. And you have more than one job. I mean, you have a couple of jobs. And like you say, you may be driving Uber or Lyft. You may be working someplace under contract for on a spot basis, and then that project goes away.
Yeah.
You don't have the loyalty, and the companies don't seem to be willing to keep the employees on when times get slow.
Well, I mean, that's a whole cottage industry right there, being lawyers who can help companies make sure that people don't have any connection to the company, right? To define them as independent contractors. There's a bunch of other stuff going on just tangentially. I think I want to go back to the list for just a moment here, because we've talked a lot about Amazon, and we talk incessantly about Amazon in Chicago. But I do think that it was one of the reasons I wanted to have you here, was to get your perspective on it, because you wrote the other day or a couple of weeks ago, personally, I find it obnoxious for a healthy company to insist on getting these enticements, the $2 billion. But I'm pragmatic enough to realize now that it's a fact of corporate life.
Yeah. It is obnoxious. Amazon's doing fine, and it doesn't need all this government largesse. And Amazon, by the way, is probably the best in the country in terms of getting it. There's an outfit called Good Jobs First, which tracks it, and it says, you know, Amazon really has become number one in getting government incentives, sweeteners, tax breaks, or whatever it is. So somebody's doing something over there.
I mean, better than the NFL?
Yeah, hard to believe. But it is the way the game is played. In this case, the HQ2, as they call it, which sounds like a revved up sports drink or something. But the point is that it would have a tremendous economic impact if it did come to the Chicago area.
A good one?
Mostly. It would have a positive impact, but there would be ripples because of it. But frankly, that's one of the reasons why I personally believe Chicago has a good shot at it, because when you look at what they call the request for proposal that Amazon put out, Chicago does size up pretty well. And one of the things that I think Amazon is concerned about is community backlash, because they're having problems in Seattle on this point. the mayor, Rahm Emanuel, I think is right. They don't want to walk into that problem again, which they could in a lot of the markets they're looking at. Chicago could absorb them. There are, 8 to 10 tracts of land that you could do something with. So I think from that perspective, it has a shot. Increasingly, though, I think the political dysfunction of the state is going to get in the way. Because nobody wants to parachute into the middle of some kind of brawl like that, and that could be a problem. And so when you look over that list of 20, I think Chicago has a shot. I think the Washington area has a shot, but I also wouldn't rule out something out of the blue. If they went to Toronto, I would be astounded.
Would you put it in the top 5?
Yes,
Chicago? Yeah,
I would. Not knowing what they're really up to, but I would.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because my theory all along has been that it's going to be Toronto.
Interesting.
Because Toronto is Chicago. I mean, it's like we're almost exactly the same, right? I mean, Toronto is now just slightly larger than Chicago. Everything about the cities is so incredibly similar. We're both on the Great Lakes, so we've got abundant amounts of water and power and everything else. But they are not in the United States. They've got the health thing going for them. They've got, they're not hung up about foreigners coming into their country the way our government now is. So, I mean, it would be almost like Chicago would be perfect, but Toronto is one step better, and it's kind of in the Midwest, and I don't know.
The only thing theory. I would say to counter that is that, having been up to Toronto in the last couple of years, they're bursting at the seams. They really are. I mean, the traffic was awful, and it was difficult to get around, and the downtown was very knotted up.
That's interesting.
And again, when you open up a campus the size that Amazon's going to open up, and then you add 50,000 people plus families, you got to be able to absorb that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that I guess gets us into the whole healthcare thing, which is if you had to list your sort of 2 or 3 biggest issues right now, it would have to be that, because there's not one of us who is not dealing with some issue that has to do with how we access, even if it's just going to the drugstore to get our prescription or something. I mean, in every way we're being assaulted by the healthcare issue, and I just don't see us having the intellectual heft to be able to solve this problem.
It's a monster of a problem, and the costs keep going up. The system is opaque, so you don't know what you're paying for, and it's layer upon layer of different companies and so on. It's a huge, difficult problem. Now, the government did try to address it with Obamacare, and I know that corporate America hated Obamacare, but the fact is that it did provide greater coverage to many, many more people. That should be the goal. I mean, somewhere in life we decided that this was going to be an employer-based healthcare system. And in doing so, you become linked to your job, and there are many people who stay in jobs they don't want to stay in because of healthcare. I've often felt that if you had some kind of program that would provide health care beyond a corporation, beyond working for a company, you would unlock a whole bunch of entrepreneurship in this country.
I think that's a very good point. That you're quite right, I think, about how many people are sort of locked into jobs it's not that they hate the jobs, but they've grown out of them. They're not excited about them anymore. And somebody else could come into that job and take the company 10 or 12 or 15% further down the road just because they got new energy. But they're locked in, and we're all locked in one way or another. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because it's a drag on business.
Yeah, and it's a drag on the economy.
Yeah.
And you saw this week that J.P. Morgan, Warren Buffett, and Amazon are getting together to form some type of healthcare group, coalition for their own employees. It sent healthcare stocks downward. There's a lot of concern, and one of the reasons is that when you put those 3 entities together, you're talking about a powerhouse, or the potential of a powerhouse, And that's got to make all these traditional healthcare providers concerned.
Well, you've written about this possible, I mean, the whole dynamic between Walgreens and Amazon. You can't have a conversation without Amazon being in the sentence.
Yeah.
It's so
really
crazy.
obnoxious.
It really is, I know. No matter what you talk about, it's, oh yeah, then there's Amazon.
Right.
I mean, they're in the broadcasting business now. They're in everything. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about, could Amazon crush Walgreens beneath its thumb?
I don't think it could do that. I think Walgreens will have to do something, maybe like CVS is acquiring Aetna and become more of a healthcare provider, but Walgreens seems to be more intent on staying within the retail, pharmacy, cosmetics, that world. And, it's a highly regulated industry. And one of the things that Walgreens has been able to do is navigate that. Amazon less so. I mean, when Amazon has tried to sell basically regulated products, it's run into problems like liquor and beer. So there's a learning curve there. So I think in that respect, Walgreens is ahead of the game, but you cannot dismiss the logistical prowess, that's a great word, of Amazon and what it can get into if it decides to. Like I say, this consortium has got everyone wondering what exactly these three are going to be up to.
What do they really have
and what do they
in
really
mind?
want?
It's time to just start jumping around utterly illogically from one thing to another. I loved your column that you wrote about McDonald's and the plastic cups.
Yeah, the foam cups.
And again, it's like, it's a little story about a little thing, but it really, I think, tells a much bigger story about a giant corporation and how they're trying to grapple with themselves and their future.
That one began when we noticed that in the Chicago area, the foam cups had returned.
These the big tall white
The big
plastic
tall ones
things,
that keep your drink really frosty, and they use them. They were using them for cold drinks, and years ago, I guess, used them for hot drinks, but discontinued it. Anyway, they were getting a lot of pushback from environmentalists and saying, we can't recycle these things, and they're a drag on the environment. It bumped up against what McDonald's is trying to do, which has become a much more modern company, more relating to millennials and such, who have I think, a greater social conscience.
Yeah, and if this was a new company just coming out of the chocks now,
Yeah.
they would never dream of,
Right.
just for image reasons alone, let alone environmental.
I always got the impression that somebody got a deal. They had a lot of them in the pipeline. They had to get rid of them. But fast forward a year or so, and they've made a commitment to get rid of all of the foam cups now, and to also step up their recycling, of fiber-based products and make those 100% recyclable and so on. So they are doing something, and when McDonald's does it, they're a leader in their world, and others will follow.
People note.
And people note.
Yeah.
In this case, maybe they were a little bit behind because there were other major companies that had already committed to getting rid of that plastic foam. But McDonald's got in line with that. Dunkin' Donuts, by the way, still hasn't. Chick-fil-A has not. They're still out there. I got a couple of nasty emails from, I guess, franchisees or customers who really like them, who say, it's a good customer value and it keeps the drinks cold. So there.
Yeah. Again, I get these reminders about every 3 hours of how my age is advancing. But in that article, you pointed out that the McDonald's, the clamshell, the foam clamshell things that their burgers were in, that was 27 years ago that they stopped that?
Unbelievable.
If you had asked me, I would have said maybe 9 or 10 years ago.
And they got a ton of good press when they did that, because they went over to these specially treated paper-based wrappers. And
27 years ago.
Right, and then they were, they kind of squandered that by not staying with it.
Right, that's right. So, I mean, just... let's give them a few seconds too. We talked about Sears. Sears and McDonald's, in my mind, are kind of one and the same because they have many of the same kinds of challenges. There's something about being an old established company that even if you're a really good old established company and you have great value in the market and everything, you're old and it's time for something new to replace you.
Well, that's right. And I think both of them had sort of, for a long time, said, we will tell the customer what they want. And we're not going to listen to the customer. And that changed. And in McDonald's case, they heard. And they've gone through a number of wrenching changes to be more, you know, you're still selling fast food. I mean, you know, that is, so the areas of nutrition and healthy diets and all that, that's not going to go away. They still have to deal with those issues. In the case of Sears, you know, they wanted to be everything to everyone. They told you what they were going to give you, and if you didn't like it, well, there was something wrong with you.
My parents loved the fact that Sears gave them the choice of Sears Best or the regular or the economy version, right? And they would always tell me, when you go to Sears, always buy a Sears Best because it's a better quality. When you think about that today, that it just seems so absurd that some company would actually tell you what it is that you're going to buy. I mean, we have so much choice that it's just almost sickening because we can't control how much choice we have. Again, just jumping all over the place. There's been a proposal that you've written about to float $107 billion bond in Illinois that would just, in one fell swoop, take care of the pension problems and lots of all the problems we have. So in other words, it would be like, you know, consolidating your credit card loan into one payday loan or something, right?
Yeah, payday loan's a good way to look at it.
What is the story?
The State University Annuitants, which is an advocacy group and an association for retired and current workers, came up with this plan and are talking about it in Springfield. It's a $107 billion bond over X number of years. And like you said, the idea is that it would directly go into funding the pensions and then inevitably bring them up to 90%, which is considered fully funded. Bad idea. Why is it a bad idea? Well, there's a lot of downside to it. You know, floating a bond that big, first off, Illinois is really not in any shape to be doing that. It can't even pay its bills on time, and it hasn't been able to get a budget until lately. There's a lot of dysfunction that reflects badly. But you could probably bring it to market if you really sweetened it with a nice above market rate, but that's going to cost us more. And then finally, you know, when you float something that big, what does that do for your other opportunities for other financing you need for bridges and infrastructure and whatever else they come up with? So it's
just basically all that money is sopped up for the next 30 years or something.
Yeah, to fund the pensions. But having said all that, you know, a tip of the cap to this group for thinking big and bold and again, getting it out there. The public pension crisis is a real issue. It's got to be dealt with. And we in Illinois, because of the state constitution, which limits what can be done, and along with the politics of all of this, are really in a trick bag. It's difficult to address. So, you know, I mean, it's going to take a greater mind than mine to figure out how we get around the public pension crisis, but it's got to be solved.
At some point, though, wouldn't it actually, if you could do it, wouldn't it save some money? Because, I mean, if we're doing it with the piecemeal way we're doing it now, we're spending much more money in...
Yes. That is the theory, you know, and the mathematicians who are part of this group are going before the lawmakers to kind of prove that and test it, and we'll see if it holds up under fire.
I want to go back to well, actually, the thing that actually got me going on trying to get you here was the piece that you wrote about net neutrality. Net neutrality is the number one topic at this table. I just think it's everything, because as we've been saying, everything in our lives is becoming digitized and is moving over 5G networks, 4G networks, whatever it is. And so there are these kind of two things that kind of merge for me. The issue about net neutrality, and then the story just yesterday that Donald Trump, of all people, introduced this idea that maybe when we develop 5G, the newest, fastest, super internet, or whatever you want to call it, that maybe it ought to be federalized. that it should be run by the United States government instead of run by the private industry. Needless to say, private industry squashed him within about a nanosecond. But it's an interesting concept that maybe when you look at how the 2G, 3G, and 4G was rolled out in this country, it wasn't that great. And we haven't done it as well as with everything else. We haven't done it as well as a lot of other countries. I'm sure the Norwegians did it better.
Well, the whole issue of net neutrality comes down to who gets access and who's going to control that access.
Yes.
And if it's a couple of internet service providers whose names we all know because they're the cell phone companies, whomever, are going to stop smaller organizations from getting free and open access to the internet, or even larger companies like Netflix and Hulu, Amazon, if they have to pay premiums in order to get their product out there or get favorable treatment, I think it really does undercut the democracy of the internet. And you know, in essence, that's what it sort of comes down to. It's an important tool for democracy. Yes, there's a lot of commercial application, but there's an awful lot of ideas and other things that are out there. And so, the net neutrality situation, the FCC basically just decided to go the other way, and they did it in the face of massive popular opposition, which kind of astounds me that that's happening. But there's this ethos, if you will, in the Trump administration that's anti-regulation. So like you say, when he talks about nationalizing it, it is unusual. But this anti-regulatory approach, and one of the reasons you're seeing the economy take off the way it is that companies not only believe that they're going to see that regulation is going to be eased up, they're going to see far fewer regulations as long as he's in office. And that's got them all geared up to expand and to do different things. What we don't know is what's the impact of all of this on the environment, on labor, on the everyone that could be impacted or affected by these things. And that will take years for us to realize what's going on.
I saw this morning or yesterday that Trump's own FCC chairman just sort of shot him down and said, "No, Don, we're not going to do that. Shut up," because the private enterprise will handle it. Thank you very much. Go away. But I mean, it is time for us to start talking about 5G and what 5G is going to do. Imagine these guys being able to work 100 times faster than they're working now, which is what they're saying some of this 5G is going to be. Just imagine the good and bad of that.
And God forbid you send an email to somebody you don't want to, or a text. Who knows what would happen.
Right. Or you'd have to start watching 4 movies at the same time just to use up some of your bandwidth.
Well, and even the bandwidth in your head. I mean, it's being taxed tremendously. And we've got a lot of distracted walkers, distracted drivers, a lot of distracted children.
Yes.
And all of this has some kind of social toll. And I'm not a sociologist by any stretch, but one of the things I like to do with the column is sort of remind business that world exists. And that it isn't just what they see as their business plan or priorities, that the world kind of seeps in, like with McDonald's.
Right. Well, I mean, I kind of came to the conclusion a while ago that the human brain is about a 3G device. I mean, I think that's about the speed we run at. So I don't know what attacking it with a 5G iPad is going to do. At some point, we're just going to melt in front of all of this data. Really. But again, I sound now like somebody talking about this newfangled telephone thing. It's going to destroy us all. So,
and isn't that the risk we of a certain age run? Because we don't want to become the guys who the grandpa and the Simpsons who's screaming at the clouds.
No, we do not.
And yet you do, if you look at it in a little longer lens, you realize that there are downsides to this, or at least things that you have to pay attention to. Younger people, and there are a lot of young people who are in business, and we talk a lot about mentoring and such. There are a lot of young people, very smart, very good, but they need seasoning. And one of the things that, particularly in Silicon Valley, you're beginning to see is that investors are stepping in and saying, hey, you have to slow down and start taking into account what it is you're doing. The situation at Uber is a good example.
Right.
There are others. And you know, it's nice to give these young entrepreneurs their head, but they also have to understand that you can't just do what you want when you want to do it all the
That
time.
everything does fit into a larger matrix.
Yes.
Somehow or other, yeah.
Right.
Radical change of subject. You worked for Governor Quinn for a while.
Again, 18 months.
Yeah,
seems to be my
18 months. Well, it wasn't your fault. There was an election.
No, but I left. I left after he won the primary.
Oh, did you?
Against Tom
I thought
Hines.
you were. I thought you were
No,
there
no.
until the election.
Oh, no.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, I did work there, and you know, you've worked in government.
Yes.
I've worked in
I
government.
worked for Daily, so. Yeah.
And you have a completely different perspective from the inside out. It's good, bad, and ugly.
It is. That's exactly right.
And the good for me was I worked with a lot of really bright, young, engaged, intelligent people who wanted to do good things in government. My staff would get up at 7 in the morning and watch The West Wing on cable before they came into work. They were dedicated. The bad is that you do have a lot of immovable objects in government, and it's very difficult to get things done.
Yeah.
And frustrating, you know. But you learn. And I was able to take that with me, and fortunately, the Better Government Association was rebuilding at that time.
Yeah.
And so I was able to go there and sort of use my journalism and public policy background to
But
move
that
it
has the good and bad and ugly in it too.
Which is that?
Even the BGA. I mean,
Sure.
when you're in this kind of not-for-profit world, and I don't know this firsthand, but my guess is that, like everything else, you've got to produce, right? I mean, you're a journalist. You've got to come up with a certain number of stories. You've got to break stories, and you've got to root out corruption on some kind of like regular basis on a schedule or something. So I would imagine that's really challenging.
It is challenging. In our time, we were in a rebuilding mode. Andy Shaw was the CEO, and he did a tremendous job in terms of fundraising. Bob Herguth, who's a longtime investigative reporter, and myself were putting together the investigative and the policy teams. And you're right. You know, there were a lot of things that you wanted to get going. One of the things we wanted to do, though, was make sure that the BGA was going after the right types of stories and raising its profile in the right way. And I think that's continuing. I think those kinds of watchdog organizations are key to a community and offer, they supplement in many respects the other investigations that are going on, and it's important.
When it works well, it does work well because you get the partnerships with the conventional news operations and everything. I bring that up just because I just was wondering if you're a Tribune employee, and you must have been in the building yesterday when the great debate happened with Rauner and I just forgot her name, the Republican candidate, Jeannie Ives. There it is. Okay, came back. I mean, it looks like from what we're reading as the outcome of it is that he got kind of chewed up by her.
Yeah, I wasn't in the editorial board when it was going on. I watched it online. Yeah, I mean, they went at it, and I think it gave her a credibility that she didn't have, but how far is that going to take you?
Yeah.
I think that $500,000 she got from the campaign donor will
That's
probably
gonna
take her further, and what she does with that.
Yeah.
But you know, Rauner's comeback is always Mike Madigan is a bad guy.
Mike Madigan, yeah.
And I think people have heard that, and he's got to start coming back with a stronger message. And she is really targeted him in that debate.
Yeah.
We call it a debate. You know,
Yeah,
they were side by side.
What'd you think of the Carol Marine debate, the TV debate? We've been joking here about the fact that everybody left with saying, "Well, I know who I want for governor. It's Carol Marine."
I think, like a lot of people, I was taken aback by Chris Kennedy's not answering the questions the way that I think we've come to, we expected him to answer. And again, that's shaping up with Biss and Pritzker. I do think these commercials that Rauner is running against Pritzker could be effective. But
because people will see them and they'll just say, "Oh, look, it's just." They won't bother
guilt by association.
analyzing them and saying, "Well, look, there really isn't that much here," or something like that. They'll just say, "Oh, look, see, he's a crook. He was."
But I got to tell you, the calculus escapes me why Bruce Rauner, a Republican, is going after a Democratic primary candidate. There's got to be something going on there that I just don't get.
Well, maybe he'll change his mind after tomorrow.
He might, yeah.
He's got to start putting a few shekels up against his own opponent. Again, just radical changes of topic here. I was just fascinated with this thing that Richard Roper got caught up in yesterday. Did you see that?
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know. Is that a story worth talking about?
You know what? I don't know. I think maybe if it goes to the issue of credibility and transparency, then yeah, it's something to talk about.
We should say that Richard Roper, of course, is a longtime columnist at the Sun-Times. And he's been kind of moved to the side for many years when he was doing the film and all that. And then the new management announced that he's going to come back as a sort of a page 2 columnist, as a political analyst and so forth. A big deal for him. And then suddenly we hear that the New York Times outed him and a bunch of other celebrity writers and stuff for buying Twitter followers. He bought 25,000 Twitter followers.
I didn't even know you could do that. I've got 500. I'm lucky to have them.
Yeah, well, see, you could have 25,500.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, but you might lose your job as a columnist.
Yeah, right. I mean, look, if it goes to the issue of credibility or whether it raises questions, it's worth examining. In my gut, I kind of think it's much ado about nothing. But we'll see.
But we'll see what happens with it, yeah. Let's see. I got to move quickly here. Let's talk a little bit about the CTA. I think you've written about it in the past, but Greg Hines wrote a thing recently about how their numbers are going down for the first time in a long time. Even their rapid transit numbers are going down, and the theory is that it's Uber and Lyft.
Oh, I think that's probably right on the money.
So, is this like a Sears and Amazon thing, or is it something completely different?
I don't know if it's completely different. I think there's some similarities, but I'm astounded at the popularity of Lyft and Uber. And when you are downtown, and I'm downtown nearly every day, they're all over the place. And there's a lot of traffic congestion. It seems to me that there's many more cars on the road, and I know that they're stopping short and they're causing problems. The CTA bus drivers aren't happy about it. The cab drivers definitely aren't happy about it. And this is something that we are going to have to understand and get our arms around once again, not only from the standpoint of regulations and fees, and because you're using the public roads, but also just socially, what does it mean? And as you mentioned, you have a lot of people who are part-time and who are driving. They may not know the roads as well, and that type of thing. That's a problem. But they're also providing service to communities that traditionally have not been getting those services.
That's right. Like everything else we've talked about, there's just upsides and downsides to everything. But a fully loaded Red Line train can run from Howard Street all the way down, or from 95th Street all the way up, with 800 people on it.
Right.
And if you want to
but
take
it doesn't
800
take
people
you to the
work,
doorstep of where you want to go.
well, there's that, right? But if you want to take 800 people that journey in a Lyft or an Uber, it's going to be hundreds and hundreds of cars. Maybe it's 500-600 cars on the road.
Well, and this gets down to what I would call the hybrid society. And when we talk about the transitions that you and I are seeing, and from our vantage point, it's becoming less all of one thing or another. And it is becoming much more a blend of different functions and different ways to do things. And that is directly a product of choice, technology, and just people wanting to go their own way. And I think that's going to continue. It's not going to stop.
But we have a mayor who is really committed to and investing heavily in transit. And now, for the first time in my lifetime, we're seeing real improvements, I think, and I've said many times, I think the CTA is a vastly better operation than it was 20 years ago. But for the first time, we're seeing these kind of intellectuals saying maybe we're in a post-transit mode. Maybe that's not. Maybe the other way of looking at this Uber and Lyft thing is that in 10 or 15 years they're all just going to be self-driving vehicles anyway, and they will be much more efficient. You can put hundreds and hundreds and hundreds more of them on the expressway because they'll all be 18 inches apart, driving at 60 miles an hour and all these other utopian things. So maybe the idea of moving lots and lots of people with big steel rails from one place to another is as old-fashioned as Sears, right?
It could very well be. And when you think about it, mass transit's been around, since the 19th, end of the 19th century? And it has gone through all sorts of changes, but you're right. It could be a totally different way of moving people around and where they live and how they live. So it's going to reflect that. I don't know if Chicago will be on the cutting edge of that. I have a feeling it will occur probably overseas in different places, and we will draw from those models.
Well, it'll occur in newer cities.
Yes.
Because we invested in all of this heavy rail 100 years ago, and we've still got it, and it still works really well. So, I find it to be very similar to the conversation that was going on when I was working for the city and Mary Dempsey was library commissioner. They were still building libraries and very proud of the libraries that they were building. And I talked to her about that several times and said, they're saying that we may be in a post-book world and we won't need libraries anymore. And she said very convincingly, no, we'll always need libraries. Their role will change. They'll become community centers. They'll become nodes for connections and everything else. But we're now at a point where we probably don't need as many libraries as we need. Their utilization, as I understand it, is going down. And it's just like everything else. Everything is just changing. So no matter what you do, no matter what business you're in, no matter what your flavor is, it's all changing.
Yeah, and the difficulty as a worker is to recognize and go with the change and not resist it, while at the same time maintaining what I consider to be core values and keeping true to yourself. And not getting swept away by all of this innovation and losing your humanity or looking out for other people. So it's difficult to cope in this society.
Said the guy who has a job in a big city newspaper as a columnist, talking to the guy who's talking on cable television, right?
Hey, we're all communicating.
A couple years ago, that would have been much cooler than it is now. But that's our job. Wow, Bob, I really enjoyed this, and I hope we can do it again sometime. We can fit into your schedule, so it'll be great. We haven't even solved half the problems of the world today, but we'll have to try it again sometime. Okay,
another time.
All right, thanks. Bob Reed is the business columnist at the Tribune. You're
I'm a business columnist.
A business columnist, all right, okay. But he's in the paper a lot, and he's online a lot, and you can see it all just by going to the Tribune or Tribune.com, and you can see all of our programs by coming to this address at any time. You can see hundreds and hundreds of past Chicago newsrooms, and we hope you'll do that sometime. And we'll be back next week with yet another show, so thanks for watching. I'm Ken Davis. See you next time. Bye-bye.